Lounge. I will just give everybody a few minutes to filter in, and then we'll dive into today's session. Just a quick housekeeping items as well. The session will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel as well as our CAR Connect, which we do have a group on CAR Connect specifically for women in National Women in Agriculture networking group. So please check that out if you haven't already. Also, we do have AI translation tool available if you are a French-speaking person in the country. So there is instructions in the chat right now on how to access that AI translation tool. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. All right. Well, without further ado, again, I just want to say welcome again to this month's LeadHer Lounge. My name is Rebecca Bolston, and I'm the project lead for the National Women in Agriculture and Agri-Food Network project here at the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council. I also co-own and operate a dairy farm and cash crop farm in Quebec with my husband and our three daughters. And I'm so glad that you can join us today. Before we dive into our topic, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So Canada is the home of more than 600 First Nations who have governed and managed these lands since the beginning of time. The Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council gratefully acknowledges that we work throughout the lands of these First Nations, and our office is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The LeadHer Lounge is our monthly conversation space where we bring everyone in agriculture together to talk about issues that shape women's lives and work. No slides, no formal presentations, just real conversation. Today, we're diving into the powerful theme of invisible work. By invisible work, we mean all those unpaid, often unrecognized tasks that keep our families, businesses, and communities running. Whether it's managing the household, volunteering, or contributing to the farm in ways that don't always show up on the books. This work is essential, but it also often goes unseen. We're joined by two amazing speakers who are helping shine a light on this issue. First, we'll hear from Emma Saffar from Afeas, who will give us a national perspective on invisible work across industries in Canada. Then we'll dive into talking to Heather Watson from Farm Management Canada, who will share insight from the research they did on the experience of farm women. And finally, although Agriculture East Quebec couldn't be with us today, I'll highlight their important work, especially their unique calculator that puts a dollar value on invisible work in farming. I'd also like to highlight that we have AI translation services available. If you're needing translation, please follow the instructions in the chat or reach out to any of us if you have issues. We'll also have 15 minutes at the end of this session for your questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat or Q&A as we go, and we'll address those at the end. So let's start things. Let's start off by zooming out to the national perspective. So Emma from Afeas has been such a leader in studying invisible work in Canada. So to kick us off, Emma, can you define for us what invisible work is?
Yeah, of course. I think actually the definition that you gave was an excellent definition of what invisible work is. So usually invisible work can also be called unpaid work, and it's going to refer to all the essential tasks that's going to sustain a household, communities in general, the economy even. But all these tasks are either unpaid, underpaid, undervalued, and overlooked. So what we include in those invisible tasks, we're going to include caregiving for children, caregiving for seniors, or for people with disabilities. We can also include housework in general and house management, volunteering, which a lot of women do. And then we're going to have more specific things as well. So for instance, working on a farm or doing anything that's not specifically your work usually. But I think the important thing to mention as well is what makes those things invisible is actually the lack of acknowledgement and the lack of official economic statistic acknowledging that work, for instance, in the GDP in general. And even in policies or even by the general public, there's no official acknowledgement.
Great, thank you. Can you also tell us why it's so important that invisible work is recognized, valued, and measured? I know you kind of spoke to it, but if you can expand a little bit more on that, both socially and economically.
Of course. So I think there's, as you mentioned, there's two big things. First of all, I'm going to say that recognition matters because invisible work is the foundation of all visible labor and the visible economy. So without unpaid caregiving or domestic tasks or people doing some volunteer work, Canada is not able to sustain its labor market. So basically, the entire Canadian economy, the entire Canadian labor market could not function without having people doing that unpaid work. So then also valuing and measuring this work would be a way to ensure that policies are put into place and that can actually reflect the cost of sustaining families, sustaining the economy, sustaining our communities in general, and that we could also make sure that we actually have some resources, that we have some resources for childcare, for elder care, for caregiving in general that can be allocated depending of our needs and our specific realities as well. And one thing, I know that you're going to be speaking about the work that les agricultrices du Québec are doing, but measuring invisible work is so important, and especially because it's also a way to make women's contribution visible and especially in ways that could actually advance and help gender equality. And we're not saying that invisible work is not going to happen anymore and that it's not normal. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that there's always going to be some form of unpaid work, and the lack of recognition and the impact those unpaid work this unpaid work has on women's life, that's the thing that is not normal. Because I know that you mentioned briefly the economically and socially impact. So there's two big things, because economically we can see throughout the country actually, and in many countries, that women are going to face some reduced income, are going to face reduced pensions, reduced career progression. They're going to have higher risk of poverty as well, especially in the old age. And all of this because we do not have at the moment the policies that we need to make sure that women are taken care of and that the work they're doing to sustain our communities is actually valued. And also, if we want to look at that through a productivity lens, we can also say that at the moment, the economy and the Canadian economy is losing productivity because women are not able to fully integrate into the economy, and they are usually pushed into part-time jobs, precarious jobs, and their contribution is not being acknowledged. And all of that is going to have an economic impact on women, but also a social one, because of course families are going to bear some stress. We have inequality between men and women that is going to keep growing and growing. So yeah, I think it's a lot of things that are really depending on being able to acknowledge and recognize those efforts.
Great, thank you. I know you had said that there wasn't really any policy, but is there advocacy or maybe even some policy that does help make invisible work more visible?
There is actually. So in Quebec, Afeas has been working on that topic for almost 60 years. We started with family-owned businesses, and les Agricultrices du Québec have been doing an incredible job in raising awareness specific for women farmers in Quebec. So we've been working with the Quebec government to have an invisible work day just to be able to raise awareness with the public. Also working with Statistic Canada to make sure that we're able to include some data on invisible work. So for a moment, we had some question on unpaid work and home management in census. Those questions have been removed, but we've been working with them as well to make sure that we can reinstate those questions, because we think it's really important to be able to have those nationwide census and questions. There have been some federal policies as well. For instance, the Canada Child Care Act, there have been some tax credits for caregivers. but they usually don't fully recognize invisible work, or at least not name it. But and they're not really extensive as well. For instance, if we take the example of the Childcare Act, we've been discussing with a lot of women throughout the country, in agriculture, but as well immigrant women, indigenous women, women living in Yukon or Northern Territories, and they've been saying it's great on the idea of financial accessibility, but then there's still a lack of spaces. There's still a lack of physical accessibility. If you live in some remote parts or rural parts, it's impossible to find a way to actually access childcare. So I think there's a lack of discussion and dialogue with what we need as women and what we need as communities and what the government is currently offering us. But I think it's also we still have great opportunities to maybe work together and work together as communities, as women, and work with the government to make sure that our needs are being satisfied and that they understand the contribution that we do every day.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emma. That does give us such a clear view on how invisible work is a bigger social issue across Canada. But let's bring it down, or sorry, let's bring the lens back to agriculture. So Heather, Farm Management Canada did important research a few years ago on the experience of farm women, including their invisible work. In your research, what stood out about farm women's experiences?
Yeah, so thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Emma, too. I was saying kind of before we got on this call that it's really good, I think, for us to connect with organizations outside of agriculture, so we're not kind of limited to our own thinking, and we understand this is a wider challenge, and there may be wider opportunities by working together. So really appreciate being here together. So first of all, yeah, our research we conducted it basically because we were curious. We had heard anecdotes like we go to conferences or host workshops, and the women will say, well, I do most of the finances, or I do most of the bookkeeping, or I do most of the, XYZ. But we couldn't find any national data. There's national data on women in agriculture, thanks to groups like CARC and things. But we couldn't find anything specific to farm women. And so we wanted to have a foundation of facts to replace kind of stereotypes and anecdotes. So that's kind of where this research came from. And then the things that surprised us, there were a few things, and I know we only have a little bit of time, so I can't say everything. But it was interesting because when we're, looking at all the data and we're trying to say, okay, what's the story here? Like where are the patterns? Typically in research, you look at demographics, so age, marriage status, things like that, or farmographics, as we like to call them, farm size, location, things like that. But in this research, when we did all the segmentation analysis and pattern analysis and cluster analysis and all that wonderful stuff, the difference that made the difference started with communication and the level of communication and satisfaction with communication, which was interesting because from there, communication really impacted feelings about relationships and worth and value and am I being recognized for my skills, or am I just being put in a job because somebody has to do it and it's the thing left over, or because we've always had a woman do that job, or things like that. So it was interesting, and I mean, when you look back, look outside of it, you think, yeah, of course communication is key, but the question is, how often do we concentrate on that? Like usually we're like technical solutions, right? Like, okay, let's make a template for that, or let's get a machine for that, or use AI for that. But it's really down to interpersonal relationships. And maybe that's not surprising to this audience, but it was surprising to the academic audience being like, oh, but like surely it's, dairy farmers are different from chicken farmers. And, that's how we usually look at agricultural data. And then I would say one of the things, and this relates to the invisible work for sure, one of the things that really surprised us was, and we kind of knew this going into the study because we had, focus groups and things like that. But half of the, 1,025 farm women that we surveyed reported that they're not comfortable identifying themselves as a farmer. Yet, like I can tell you, these women are, making extraordinary contributions, highly involved in farm operations, and any way you slice the data. Um, it was interesting. Like when you look at, how many hours are worked, the type of work that they're doing, super, super involved, and yet, they don't identify themselves as a farmer because that's not what a farmer is, which is an interesting thing to think about, and something that I think we'll probably come back to. Um, but then I was also surprised, and we kind of get this as we present the research, because of course we have to talk about, we talk about all the good stuff and all the wonderful things, and how can we support and things, but we also need to, check in on the challenges and the barriers faced by women, on the farm. And we separate those two things because at first we said, okay, let's talk about, barriers. And they said there are no barriers. Like we will get through anything. Like we will punch through a wall if we have to. Like, don't talk to us about barriers. But they're like, but the reality is there are challenges where we've had to find a workaround to get the same kind of acknowledgement or get the same kind of opportunities as our gender counterparts as it may happen. So some of these challenges and barriers were things that, might be expected, I hate to say, but traditional expectations around women's roles. And, some of that comes from the culture and beliefs and values. But also things like lack of acknowledgement of their authority, as well as, and again, this is a sensitive topic, but harassment and violence. So, the range of challenges and barriers was incredible and surprising and sad all at the same time. But also the rate with which women were experiencing these was also like, we've got to open our eyes and pay attention. So I'm glad now that we have, specifically for farm women, kind of that foundation of facts to say, okay, now what do we do with this?
Great. Yeah, it's amazing when the data is presented to you. Sometimes you're like, of course that makes sense. But then when the data is presented to you, okay, there's numbers there, so there's more meaning behind it for sure. And
Yeah.
looking at your research as well, what did it reveal about invisible work specifically?
Yeah, so and I'm not entirely sure I have the definition of invisible work right. But I'll tell you what it revealed about the work of farm women, and maybe in my mind how I see there's an issue here. So we asked women about their involvement in the farm, involvement in off-farm work and activities, so volunteer work as well, and then compensation. So we are like, okay, those three, that seems like a pretty good trifecta. And so nearly half of the women are working more than 40 hours a week on the farm, which of course in my world, working not in agriculture, 40 weeks is a work week. That's a full-time work week. And I think we have to remember that sometimes within the context of agriculture, because, maybe 80 hours a week isn't normal. Maybe it shouldn't be. But anyways, that's a conversation for another day, Rebecca. Um, and Anyway, so over 30% of the women are also in as well as 40 hours per week on the farm or more, are pursuing off-farm income to support the farm. So we have, doing off-farm income to support my career goals, doing off-farm income because, hey, let's just raise our household income, but specifically to support the farm. And we know that, agriculture is high risk, high rewards, but also very, very tight margins. And so to say, okay, I'm going to work 40 hours a week on this farm, and then I'm going to go do another job for 40 hours a week, just so that we can continue to farm is another thing that's, again, like, how does this math work? How can we perpetuate this and stay sustainable? And then meanwhile, on the compensation side, 30% aren't getting paid for their contributions to the farm. So I think there's invisible work there. Work in terms of, and then we have a whole like list of, we asked, because believe it or not, there's no framework that says like, here's all the like tasks or areas of responsibility, on a farm. And so we asked women about everything from like farm business management and including HR and finance and record keeping and things, to livestock and crop management, sales and marketing and all that good stuff. And so highly involved in all those pieces, but also came up kind of the domestic responsibilities, for lack of a better term. And we talked about them already. So things like care of dependents and, bringing meals to the field, or doing a parts run into town, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and the one thing I kind of want to, so, I mean, we didn't specifically go in trying to study invisible work because we knew the agriculturists and those groups were working on things like that. But it certainly complements that work. And the other thing I was thinking as Emma was speaking, um, is I think there's a problem just in terms of recognition of work in agriculture because, or in farming specifically, because like I'm thinking of looking at your income statement or your statement of revenues and expenses, as it were, and not to get too geeky, but we look at the line items, and in like a typical operation, like in our organization, there's a line item for staff and labor and what does it cost to keep things going and to pay people to do the work? Oftentimes in farming, we don't have that. And and specifically when it comes to the family farm, we don't have that because compensation's recognized in a lot of different ways. So compensation's recognized as, partial ownership sometimes, if it's in writing, all that good stuff, but also the promise of, we see this in farm transition specifically, one day this will all be yours, don't worry about it. And so I think that kind of contributes to it because there's not a line item for it. We don't think about it. Like imagine if there was a line item for catering services. Meanwhile, it's you cooking, running the field, doing this stuff, but there's a line item with like, numerical values to that and thinking, yeah, if it wasn't for my, amazing spouse or my amazing family or whatever the case may be, these amazing women, and I'm being, a bit traditional here, but this is what the data shows, where would we go for food and how much would it cost? So yeah, I talked too much. I know, Becca. I'm sorry.
No, 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 it's all good stuff. I mean, I kind of already answered my next question, which was what kind of tasks came up as invisible work, where you had mentioned those field meals, those parts runs. Is there any other ones that were maybe surprising, or maybe you didn't realize that they were tasks that women were pretty much doing invisibly?
Um, I'm not sure there was anything that surprised us. And I know I saw Merle's comment just pop up there. Off-farm work isn't new in agriculture. Most farms do have off-farm work, but it's the fact that and I think it's been talked about as the third shift. I think, I don't know, I should probably copyright that for someone, give a source, but it's like you have the farm 40 hours, you have your job 40 hours, and then you have all the other responsibilities that aren't necessarily recognized. And again, it's around the domestic response, care of dependents, and we talked about the meals and things like that. So I mean, to me, there wasn't anything um, surprising that came up in terms of invisible work. But one of the things that I think, and again, maybe it's how we define work, but one of the things that came up is we asked about, typically we call it hard skills and soft skills. And of course, I hate that because the soft skills are the hardest skills. It's the hardest thing to learn and the hardest thing to do is, having conversations, having empathy, being a good listener, like truly being a good listener, not just hearing, but kind of listening. And so we asked women just for kicks, we're like, because we're in the skills development game, just like you guys, and we said, so like what technical job knowledge skills kind of like do you bring to the farm, and like what would you say you're really really good at? And so it was like, and this is like in order, which is I think amazing and awesome, like financial skills, organizational skills, animal care and planning, management, communication. And we're like, awesome. And we're like, okay, what kind of like, I guess, personal skills or interpersonal skills or personal qualities do you bring to the farm? And it was things like dedication, work ethic, helpfulness, empathy, critical thinking, and adaptability. And it's just like, you can't put a number to that. At least I'm not aware of being able to put a number to that. But like, we then asked, okay, well, if you could take any training, if resources weren't an issue, time, money, all the things we talk about in terms of challenges, accessibility, as we just talked about, what would you like to learn about? And it was interesting because it was all technical skills. So like we got the personal skills. Like we know how to listen. We know how to, it was like, I want to, learn more about the mechanics of the equipment so that I can be more helpful in XYZ. Or like it was all the production side, which was really interesting because they are involved. But I think this goes back to that defining a farmer as typically, I think who's in the field, who's in the tractor, who's in the barn, who's in the machinery and who's doing the producing, as opposed to the other side that makes the farm tick, which is the managing and the leadership and the communication. I don't know if that answers your question, but it was something interesting where I thought of all the things that you could, learn about. And we hear this, we had a women's farm women's advisory committee, and they were like, we don't need courses on, this stuff. Like, I mean, it's always nice to top up and for younger folks for sure, but it's like, we got this. What we need is this. And so, yeah, it was just a really interesting avenue that we went down.
Oh, for sure. No, it is interesting to kind of see where, I mean, me too. I'm like, I would love to learn how to drive with GPS because that's not something we have on the farm. But yet, like, I don't need the financial skills because I already have those. That's what I do. And then I also do all the animal care. I do the tractor driving. I'm a farmer, 100%. So yes, that all resonates as well. So how does invisible work shape women's role in the farm business, decision making, or identity? Kind of explained how some women don't consider themselves farmers. But did you see anything else in your research that kind of would hit that?
Um, so I think recognition, self and from others goes hand in hand with feelings of value and authority and decision making. So I think there's definitely kind of a correlation that happens. Like if half of the farm women out there aren't comfortable identifying as a farmer despite being heavily involved in virtually every aspect of the farm, we got to dig into that a little bit more. And we've talked about it, so we don't need to talk about it more at this time. But we see this in the work that we do on farm business management. So we're a national nonprofit, and we kind of do things that CARC does on the business side, financial planning, business planning, all the fun stuff. And the kind of kickback we get is that's not farming though. Like I got into farming not to do those things. I got into farming to be my own boss, to be out in the field, to be with my animals, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I wonder if that identity is part of it, the task that they're doing. If I could go on a little tangent, Rebecca, your comments on the things that you do on the farm, um, just in terms of uh, the things you do, and whether it's kind of by design or default, like I think that's a conversation too, because a lot of times, especially when it comes to the daughter-in-laws, I'm going to point out daughter-in-laws here, they get stuck doing the bookkeeping. I mean, some women love finances for sure, financial management, cool. If that's your jam, do it. Like if that's your passion, that feeds your soul for sure. But if you're doing that because that's the only spot available, or because they needed help and they needed someone to fill that role, that's a conversation that needs to happen because we all know that, when you're doing something you love, it doesn't feel like work, but truly when you're doing something you love, that's the stuff you're gonna, put your most into and like, look for training opportunities and look how to be better. But if you're doing something because someone has to do it, like that's not an amazing life to live. So I feel like there's a conversation that needs to happen there. And then, so in terms of like, decision making and identity and things like that, we know from our research that 70% of well, 69%, but let's say 70% rounded up, are responsible for the finances on the farm. So that's like the financial record keeping, bookkeeping, financial planning, if there is financial planning, which is another conversation. But they're not involved in purchase decisions. Like the amount, if I had a nickel for every time, we talked about farming with farm women, and they said, yeah, I'm like trying to keep us, above, trying to keep us in the black, but he keeps buying equipment, and like that wasn't in the plan, and then I have to rejig everything. And I don't know if anyone can identify with that, but it's like, yeah, like that lack of kind of like we're in this together. We need to strategically think and act together. We are like we're a partnership, and sometimes literally like it's in writing. We are a partnership, and we have, shares that are shared and things like that. But yeah, I find that kind of super frustrating, both being put in a position that you never wanted in the first place and having to perform well, unfair, and then also being in that position but not being given the respect and authority and decision-making ability that that should come with. It's a
For
lot of
sure.
ranting. I feel like we should throw it back over to Emma. I feel so.
Yeah. She's not ready. No, um, no, that completely makes sense too. And I'm sure there's other women here that could probably jump into the chat and talk probably even more extensively than either of us could on those extra tasks and the daughter-in-law or the in-law is yep. Enough said on that. But yeah, like that does, it creates stress and it creates all of these, like you said, communication breakdowns. And when you're talking about going into succession planning, that's a whole other conversation as well, and making sure that everybody's on the same page. But going back to the research, sorry. Have you noticed any shifts in maybe awareness or recognition within agriculture since that was released?
Okay, yeah. So our research was published in 2023. And I feel really lucky we've been able to give a lot of presentations, some openly like this and some behind closed doors with officials and things like that. You're probably not going to like this answer, but I find it really hard to gauge kind of like, have we seen changes? I mean, on a tangible side, I know we've worked together on the research that you did thereafter, and we've worked with the agriculturist group, and now in the States they're adopting the same survey and doing it in the States to kind of see how are we similar, how are we different, are things the same and things like that. So from like a research and finding out more information and digging a little deeper, it's been really good. And then of course we see the programs you're offering and programs being offered in other jurisdictions, and I don't know if we can take credit for that, but what I'm really proud of is that we have answers when the questions are asked, and we can with facts defend this the thinking, right? And I have to be careful what I say, but in some conversations, they said, are you sure this is true? Because we have women in this position, in this position, in this position. This is like really vague because I can't give away any private conversations. They're like, we're doing fine. Women in ag are doing fine. And that's where I come down to like, and this is a bit of a soapbox, but I say, women in agriculture for sure, like women, all women, Emma, all women, we've got to look at the commonalities, the differences. Women in agriculture, specific, different, unique. Farm women, even more so specific and different and unique, because you're dealing with family dynamics, and it might not even be your family, right? Like I think the majority of the women in the surveys married into the farm. Most likely, and actually, yes, because their farm from their family was transitioned to the son and not the daughter. And so the daughter, if you want a farm, you got to find a farmer. We've heard that before. Um, and so, yeah, we have this, I guess, this kind of culture and tradition, and I talked about kind of beliefs and attitudes and values that aren't necessarily making it easy. We have research that says that when there is a woman involved in the ownership and operation of a farm, the chances of a successor being woman is that much greater, which is good. So we are changing, but I'd hesitate to say that our work is doing that. We're just glad that we can kind of come back and say, you know, farm women are unique and different, and here's why. You've got the family dynamic, you've got the farming dynamic, right? You can't just leave the farm, you can't just up and go. And I mean, high risks and high rewards, right? The what we see right now happening, the tariffs and the trade and you can and can't do this in policy changes. It's the highest risk industry, I would say. And so I don't know, I guess at the end of the day, I would just say, why aren't we using our human resources to the fullest and, allowing them to be in the positions that they need to be, but also recognizing that. And I think sometimes, I hate to say it, but it comes down to like the numbers talk, right? And money talks. So for like, what would it cost for you to, that tangent again, but conversations during COVID, the number of women that had to leave their off-farm jobs and take care of the kids on the farm. No question. It wasn't a, should we do this? Can we do this? It was just like, sorry, honey, you're not going to work until this thing is done. I'm being a little bit crass about that, but the stories are true, right? And I mean, yeah. So I think if I could wave a magic wand, I would love to see more and additional quantification of what the value really is in a language that speaks to the powers that be.
Great. And we're hearing that also in the chat. So that's great. So thank you, Heather. It's powerful to see how this research captures the everyday reality of farm women. And now we're going to look a little bit into something really innovative. There we go. A tool that actually puts numbers to the invisible work. So I spoke with Catherine Rousseau, the Executive Director of Agriculture to Quebec, prior to this session to ask a bit more about the calculator that they developed to measure the cost of invisible work. So the calculator was launched in December 2024 and is available for free on their website at agriculturiste.com/outil du calcul. And I will put a link either in the chat or I'll put it in some of the information we'll send afterwards. It is only available in French though, but I used the translator on my browser and it was really easy for me to navigate. Heather did as well. It's based on a short questionnaire of about 15 questions that each person fills out. Once completed, the tool calculates the exact number of invisible work hours accomplished in a year, and then it puts a dollar figure on those hours. In other words, it shows what you would earn if you're actually paid for that work based on an hourly wage rate. The whole purpose of the tool is to make the invisible visible and to give women concrete numbers-based arguments that they can use when it comes to negotiating or advocating for recognition. So the next question I asked was, what kind of tasks does it measure? Are they household, farm, or both? So the tool is very broad. It includes farm tasks like field work, animal care, equipment maintenance and use, administration, direct marketing, and HR management. It also includes domestic tasks such as meal prep and groceries, laundry, yard work, childcare and education. And most importantly, it also recognizes volunteer work and caregiving for relatives. So when I asked Catherine what reactions do women or families have when they see this dollar value of their work, she said the biggest reaction is surprise. Seeing just how much money is left on the table each year, preliminary data shows that on average, a farm woman performs about 46 hours of invisible work per week. That's about 2,392 hours a year, which translates into a significant annual salary figure if it were paid. But beyond the money, the tool highlights a deeper issue. So in Quebec specifically, not being paid for this work means farm women often don't contribute to key social protections like retirement, pensions, and parental leave. Another reaction that they had is just awareness of inequality. In the daily rush, we often do tasks without stopping to reflect. So the tool reveals imbalances in task distribution, which can spark important family discussions. I would most definitely echo this. When I worked through the calculator a few days ago, I found that my invisible work would equal to about just over 51,000 a year. And it did spark some interesting conversations around my dinner table. Like, I'm always above average on things, right? The last question I asked was, how do agriculturists to Quebec see this tool being used by farm businesses, families, and even policymakers? And Catherine responded saying that this tool is part of a much larger effort to turn an invisible problem into an opportunity for action. For farm families, it can start conversations and lead to change within couples or households. For policymakers, the data provides concrete evidence that invisible work exists and carries real economic value. Agriculturista Quebec hopes it will support advocacy for recognition, possibly through measures like tax credits or other forms of economic acknowledgement. Simply recognizing invisible work is a first step, but this tool gives us the data to push for real change, both individually and systemically. So I really do want to thank Catherine for responding to those questions. And I think it's such a practical way to highlight just how valuable this work really is. So now I'd love to hear from everybody in the audience. If you have a question for our speakers, please drop it in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll just start answering questions or start responding to what's going on in the chat. It's definitely lively. Let's just see if I can scroll up, or if any of you have read the chat and want to respond to anything, go ahead.
Like Merle's comment on, I'm wondering if there's room for a research project that actually showcases women's entrepreneurial scope within agriculture, because they are more likely to have come from female tradition of marrying different kinds of farmers and farms, a broader depth of experience across different kinds of farms and ways to farm as a huge contrast to the, we are 5 generations on this farm and we've always done it this way. I would be super interested in that. Something that we are kind of I guess confronting in our leadership program is that, you know, attitudes and values and beliefs shaped by tradition and how that may have served those that came before but might not be appropriate for now and into the future, and how to kind of first, I guess, recognize and then try and maybe reconfigure those mindsets around, like, you can and you can't, or so things like, you know, what's the culture around making mistakes on the farm? What's the culture around learning? What's the culture around safety? Or what's the culture around, like, yeah, you know, kind of having to do everything right all the time and perfection and things. Yeah, so I'd be really interested in that. I saw that comment there. And I see Vicky's comment about farmers need to move to paying themselves wages. Like, there is a lack of financial literacy. Just in general, I mean, they couldn't make taxes more complicated if they tried. But there needs to be financial literacy on why some of these practical changes will help the farm, you know, kind of grow, you know, off-farm financial health or pensions, especially when we start thinking about transition. Oftentimes we don't think of some of the, or we don't know about some of the solutions that are there that, you know, pay off after 20 years of doing it. But if you're just finding out and you're already 70, you might not be the best. Those are a couple of things I saw in the chat that I wanted to comment on.
Great, thank you. Just trying to see if there's any other questions here. It's great though that there are questions. I mean, I feel that invisible work is becoming more visible, and I think we're all fairly aware of what we do on the farm or off the farm that's unpaid. But yeah, I agree too. I thought it was a good comment where you were talking about on a financial statement that sometimes we're not equating for what we're actually doing, that there's not a line on that that's really showing our true impact on our businesses, and thought that was great too. I also put a link in there for the calculator. You should be able to grab that. Again, if you're not French speaking, there is still, my browser translated it, and there is some really great tidbits on each one of those pages under the questions as well that gives some data and some information on each one of the topics that they go through. I thought it was really great.
I like that calculator too, because I mean, something that I wish we could do, like if I had, I don't know, if someone would just throw money at us, I would love to do, like, just across the ag sector for everyone in the ag sector, kind of like unconscious bias training, like, just to understand, because I think, like, me as a woman, you'd think I would be like, oh yeah, like, I have these challenges and I have these barriers, but you don't know what you don't know. So for me, this tool revealed all the things that I do as a woman, just because I feel somehow inherently responsible for it. I feel like I've got to make sure the household is all set. I've got to make sure everyone makes it to their doctor's appointments and dentist appointments, or you know, whatever the case may be. Or if there's an issue, you gotta resolve it. And I would love to have that kind of, I think they did it in Scotland. So I'd love to bring it to Canada, this unconscious bias training, so that we can really understand like what is reality out there and what's happening, for women, but also for everyone else. Because like I say, sometimes I answer CARC surveys and I'm like, oh, I never thought about that before, but yeah, that's interesting. Like you don't know that you're not being paid as much as your male counterparts until somebody decides to show you or tell you or you find out. But that's not the way to move forward on happenstance. Let's like make a committed, a committed go of it. Just say, you know what? We need to do this. We need to get this training out there so we understand that we don't understand it all, but we can learn.
Exactly. And I feel like those are some of the conversations that come up. We have a leadership program for women in agriculture as well. And conversations a lot about, like you said, kind of that different dynamic, but also a lot about that imposter syndrome. And maybe that's what holds us back really a lot when we're talking about the unpaid or maybe unequal pay as well. And I mean, money's not everything, especially on a farm. Sometimes you just have to do the tasks that are at hand because they have to be done and there's nobody else to do it. But at the same time, it's good to have the knowledge and that data behind you that says, kind of like lets those light bulbs go off so that when you're having conversations with associations or government, you can say, hey, did you know this? And maybe they're not even aware of what's going on, and maybe there's supports that can be put into place for that. Somebody had asked Heather if you could repeat what you had said about the training in Scotland.
Yeah, so I was part of this panel discussion. It was like a European kind of what are we doing for women in ag and farm women, and somebody from Scotland had said, I don't know the details, but I'm happy to kind of look it up and maybe I can send it over to you, Rebecca. Was that they were doing unconscious bias training for agriculture. And I mean, I'm talking in the context right now of, to do with women but there's, I mean, it applies to the equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? The whole, you know, are you being biased in ways that you don't even realize? And let's like the first step is always awareness, and then the next step is doing something about it. So apparently Scotland have been doing this. So I'd like to bring it to Canada, but I don't have any further details, unfortunately, except there was unconscious bias training in agriculture, and this is why.
We'll have to work on that together, I think. Let's do it. Amy also said in the chat, according to a report at FCC released this year, if women participated at parity in the ag economy, it would represent $5 billion in growth to the Canadians' GDP. And she did put a link up there to that research. And I think we talked about that a little bit in our research report too, that we released a few months ago. But yes, like that is a huge number, and we really do have to be conscious of that, and also just being able to shout that out here in this conversation is definitely important. Sorry. Okay, so looking down, pay transparency laws. Who put me in charge of this? Posted roles will have to show salary or pay range. Yes, some provinces already have it in place. This doesn't address gender gap, pay gap rather, but at least it empowers us to know what the range is and to negotiate for appropriate salary exactly. Yes, I agree. It doesn't speak to the unpaid roles on farm, but can influence express value for sure. Let's see, what else is there?
I think in the Q&A section, there's also a question about quantifying the invisible work of men to be able to compare it to women's and demonstrate how much more women are doing. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the tool that Agricultrices du Québec have developed actually records for both men and women. So everybody can answer that, and they're able to gather some data for men and for women. So they're able to compare how many hours men are doing and how many hours women are doing. So I really encourage you to go have a look at their tool, which is very interesting, and you have so many options, and it goes really into depth for every question.
Great. Thank you, Emma, for answering that. There's another question in the Q&A as well. How can industry better welcome women into this space? They attend farm meetings and still see few women in the space. Is there anything from either of you that you've seen that works? Or I know for us with our last project we did have event funding specifically for women events. And just talking to women in the two that I attended personally, they just said it was so nice to be able to go to an event where they knew they can bring their kids along, where they maybe didn't feel like that was something that would be welcomed at maybe an all industry event or a meeting for, say, like the dairy industry or whatever it is. So I'm not sure. I'll leave it to you guys to answer some more of that if you'd like. Or anything you're seeing that's working at different conferences as well to welcome more women.
What you say is it's exactly what we've heard as well. It's the importance of making sure that the spaces are actually welcoming. So it can be depending on the hours. When are you actually holding the event? And are you sure that women are able to attend the event at that hour? Making sure that there's some form of childcare, those kind of things to make sure that we are actually welcoming women and not just saying on paper, of course, it's open to everybody, women are included.
Agreed. I think I went to a meeting 2 years ago or maybe a year ago, and I had to bring my 10-year-old daughter because she had just had surgery and she couldn't go to school, but she could go to a milk meeting. They said it was so awesome to see somebody young who would be in the industry, hopefully in the next 10 odd years. But it is funny where I thought that maybe I would get maybe some negative attention where she was just, no, they trying to feed her and all of those other things. So it was great to see that. Heather, did you see anything in conferences either? Or is it pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, I didn't have anything to add there, but yeah, it's making it accessible and accessible in all the ways. And I think you've done a lot of research in that area too, Rebecca, like in terms of the timing and the cost and the childcare and yeah, and being conscious of like what else is going on in their lives. So like, maybe we shouldn't hold a conference like around Halloween or like around Thanksgiving or around like I don't know, Easter, like some of these dates where it's, it is like, and this isn't just women, but like family oriented. Like we need to stop interjecting ourselves into family time because we do that enough. So, but yeah, I don't have anything to add beyond what your suggestions were.
No, that makes sense. Also, Kelsey had asked in the chat if it would be possible for us to share any of the women in ag leadership groups or mentorship programs. We will certainly do that. I will also say, hopefully in the next month or so, we will have a spot on our website specifically for women in agriculture, which will list out resources by the province. So I am working on that. But when we give out communication after this and also on that Car Connect, we'll start sharing all the resources there as well.
Just picking up on that, there's a comment about, wondering if there's men on this webinar today. And it's interesting because the first question that our kind of Farm Women Advisory Group had after we did our research was, I wonder what like a study for men, like the same study, but for men, I wonder what it would say. And I wonder if there'd be similarities and differences. I think that would be really interesting. We haven't embarked down that road yet, but I mean, we've certainly seen like in our Healthy Minds, Healthy Farms mental health work, we saw, obviously farmers are, we knew this from the University of Guelph and other work, and I know Merle's here, farmers are extremely stressed and chronic stress and anxiety. And then our research showed, kind of some of the reasons for that. And it was like, yeah, like the unpredictability of the ag sector, feelings of loss of control, workload pressures, and financial pressures. But then demographically, what stood out was women had higher ranking of stress in those areas, plus maintaining family and farm team harmony and farm transition. So yeah, it's all kind of connected, and young farmers as well had higher ratings than the other kind of women and young farmers always kind of grouped together as trying to keep everyone, happy and trying to keep the farm going and trying to have Christmas dinner together or whatever the case may be. And that pressure and maybe that's the other invisible side of things is peacekeeping. Like in farm transition, we kind of joke, even though it's not really a joke, like the mom tends to be the CEO, the chief emotional officer. And we kind of, say it in just a little bit and there's chuckles in the room, but like the burden that has on women certainly came up in our results as like it's up to me to keep this family together. And if it's a choice between family together and farm continuing, it's not even a choice, like family, hello. But that's the kind of pressure being put on women as well.
Agreed. There is another question in the Q&A. There is some conversation in the chat about child tax credit people are discussing. They're just asking if we can clarify whether that's the child tax benefit or the Canada's child benefit rather that's still active, or if it's something else. I'm not sure if you guys can answer that in the chat. I'm not sure which tax credit they were specifically speaking of. There is a link there to, I believe that's the child family benefits, the Canada Child Benefit there as well. Courtney, to answer your question, if there's any men on this webinar, I am seeing a few names in the attendee list, but I would say it is definitely more female heavy on the attendance here. I'm curious about Scotland. We already answered. I do agree, Heather, that there's always some meetings around family days, or for us, our milk meeting is always on a PD day. Always, every single year. Like, I still have to find somebody to watch the kids, or maybe I'm just going to start bringing them along. Who knows? 4-H needs volunteers and fairs need volunteers for sure. Yes, the recording for this will be sent out after with some resources as well. Ask a question because are we preaching to the choir? How many men in ag know what invisible labor is, or are we actively working to change it? Great question. I know in our focus groups for the research, this was brought up quite often, I would say, and I would say there was one person, without calling anybody out because they might be in the attendee list, but they had said that looking at the end of a conference or an event, she got her husband to sit and look to see who's cleaning up afterwards. And I thought that was so important. He noticed it was only the women that were cleaning up, stacking up chairs while the men are just chatting or leaving. And she said once she brought that up to her husband, he now goes and starts grabbing the chairs and the tables and putting them away. And I thought that was so important, that sometimes it's just really showing people that there's a difference or inequality, maybe. I don't really want to put that word on it, but just showing that there's different tasks that women tend to take on and that they don't always have to take it on. So I thought that was interesting. Not sure if either of you have seen something similar too, or shaking your head as if yes, agree.
100%. Like I think, and I want to say this carefully, but I guess I'll speak to myself. I feel like sometimes I'm my own worst enemy in that I'm a people pleaser and I have a hard time saying no, as you know, Rebecca. And and it means I'm, super busy and like, oh my gosh, am I on the path of burnout and blah blah. But I think sometimes the qualities that make us amazing can also be our downfall. That like helpfulness, that empathy, when sometimes we should be questioning, is that my role? Is that my place? Is this worth my love and attention, or whatever the case may be? And it's funny you mentioned kind of cleaning up after meetings, because I get like, we had this one meeting and I think it was our first post-COVID. And so the hotel didn't have all the staff. So like, of course, like, yeah, it was exactly the same thing. After a meal, I was like, okay, like we're short on hotel staff. I know this is weird, but can everyone just kind of help with the cleanup? And it was like, women are like, yeah, like, where is it? Like, here I come, arms full of plates. And the guys are like, are you kidding me? And again, like, not all guys, but, there are some trends. But back to what you were saying, like Courtney, I'm happy that that we get to speak about this in other audiences, but totally recognize that, they need to be part of the conversation. But we also do, I think, and I know this is one of those things that not everyone believes, but I also think women need their own space and their safe space to talk about the things they need to talk about. But we can't limit it to that. We also need the spaces where we talk about it with the bigger audience, in my humble opinion.
I agree. But I do see that we are at 101. Look at us go. I do want to thank you to the speakers very much for your insight and for all of the answers to the questions as well. And to all of you for joining the LeadHer Lounge today. Invisible work is something many of us live with daily, and conversations like this are an important step in making it seen and valued. We'll be back next month. We'll be diving into mental health supports across the country, and I hope you'll be able to join us. But until then, thank you and have a wonderful day.